The Vatican collection of Roman art consists mainly of works from the imperial era, the first 4 centuries after Christ, and less so of works from the Republican era between the 5th and 1st centuries BC. This is partly owing to the tastes that were prevalent in the 18th and 19th centuries when the collection was begun and developed, and partly to the fact that most of the works discovered in the territories of Rome and Lazio, which formed the central nucleus of the papal state, belong to the imperial period. Any examination of Roman art from the Republican period must take in the wider perspective of the Italic environment and its relationship to Rome, as well as the direct and indirect influences of Greek art. In the first centuries of its history, Rome and the Latin peoples were based on the Italic peninsula, where there were a number of peoples whose languages and cultures were markedly different from each other. One only needs to look at the Greek cities in the south and Sicily, the Etruscans in Tuscany and northern Lazio, or else the Samnites in the Apennines. Yet extensive trade ties and later the Roman conquest were to lead to the development of a common artistic language. An illuminating example of this fusion between the different cultural traditions is offered by the Scipio family, one of the most powerful families in Rome between the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC, renowned for its leadership in the war against Carthage, the powerful Phoenician city situated on the site of present-day Tunis. The sarcophagus containing the body of Gnaeus Scipio Barbartus from the family tomb on the Via Appia dates back to around 270 BC and exhibits decorative artwork in the style of Sicilian Greek architecture. On the monument itself, features of a decidedly innovative style are to be found side by side with much more traditional features. On one of these walls is the fragment of what is believed to be a portrait of the poet Ennius. The portrait probably formed part of a covering for the sarcophagus with the deceased laid out beneath. This style is very typical of the sarcophagi and funerary urns of the Etruscans. The link with the Italic tradition is evident in the style of portraiture, which became progressively blended with the culturally more sophisticated Greek style. The Greek contribution may be recognized mainly by the attention that is given to the naturalistic depiction of the subjects and by the organic nature of the composition. Especially in more ancient times, portraits were generally used for funerals, or at any rate within the context of the family. The art of portraiture was developed in an environment where the cult of ancestors had a great religious importance and was an identifying element for the families belonging to the dominant aristocracy. Later, however, the use of portraits was extended to the public domain, where honorary portraits took on a political function. This change clearly reflects the evolution of the political and national structure of Rome, where the individual no longer believed that self-fulfillment and achievement were necessarily limited to the context of his own family, but could now be extended to include political and military careers in the service of the community. In the 1st century BC, the Roman state underwent a long and bloody period of civil wars that led to the definitive decline of the institutions of the Republic and the birth of the Empire. After the assassination of Julius Caesar, his adopted son Octavian managed to prevail against his adversaries and, in 27 BC, assumed full powers with the title of Augustus. A period of general peace throughout the empire followed the civil wars. A transformation as great as this inevitably had profound repercussions in the artistic field as well. In this period, Roman art, especially its greatest and loftiest works, was fundamentally a form of state art. The ancient world depended on urban and monumental programs with strong visual and scenographic impact for the transmission of ideas and the propagation of consensus. This fact also explains the enormous diffusion of official portraits of the emperor and his family. Imperial power made almost obsessive use of the repetition of elements which could be single pieces or part of a more elaborate whole, but always carried an explicit propaganda message. A political content is also evident in one of the styles most characteristic of Roman artistry, the historical relief. These bas-reliefs are generally included in the framework of more complex architectural works and depict ceremonies of public acts of particular significance in the political and religious life of Rome. The most perfect example of this genre is provided by the reliefs on the Arapacis of Augustus, where the solemn inaugural procession, which involved the entire imperial family, is transformed from a simple record of an event into an idealized image of the birth of a new era of peace and prosperity. This message of propaganda was adopted with suitable adjustments by all Augustus's successors. The figurehead of the emperor continued to be represented as a guarantor of the peace and unity of the empire. To ensure dynastic succession, the custom of deifying the deceased emperor was introduced, and the first in the series was Julius Caesar himself. These emperor gods had temples erected in their honor and became objects of what can be called state-sponsored worship. At a private level, too, the impulse to affirm one's social status at a time of widespread economic growth gave rise to a series of monuments and styles that often imitated the artistic model of the state. The form and the very nature of funeral monuments were the means by which one's image was passed down to descendants. At the same time, however, the private setting of these monuments and the fact that they were not subject to the strict needs of officialdom allow us to glimpse unexpected aspects of day-to-day life. The images passed down to us by the sculptures on the tomb of the Haterii family, which lived in the 1st century AD, are particularly lively. The tomb, situated on the Via Labicana, a short distance outside Rome, had been placed under the protection of Mercury, Prosperina, Pluto, and Ceres, gods associated with the afterlife who are depicted above the entrance. The building bears testimony not just to religious devotion, but also to the chief occupation of the family. The relief image of the funeral mourning depicts a striking number of people gathered around the deceased, a reflection of his wealth.